There was a time when the sound of chalk on a blackboard was all I ever wanted to hear. The soft scratch, the smell of old wood desks, and the faint echo of a bell that marked the rhythm of my days. I was 13, invisible, silent, and angry at a world that didn't seem to see me. My father had left, my mother worked double shifts, and our house was more echo than home. I sat in the back of every class, hoodie up, headphones in, pretending I didn't care, because caring hurt too much. It was the kind of small-town school where everyone knew everyone except me. Teachers taught from habit, students whispered their gossip, and the world moved on as if my absence didn't matter. That was until she walked in, Ms. Eleanor Ward, our new literature teacher. She wasn't like the others. Her eyes had that kind of calm that made even silence feel understood. She smiled like she saw the whole of you, not just your grades or your mistakes. And on her first day, she said something strange. Every story matters, even the ones still being written. I remember rolling my eyes. I thought it was just another adult pretending to care for a paycheck. But something in her tone made me pause. It wasn't the usual teacher voice. It was the kind of voice that makes broken things stop pretending they're fine. Weeks passed, and the year rolled on like slow rain. Ms. Ward started a project called Letters to the Future. She told us to write a letter to ourselves, not who we were, but who we wanted to be in 10 years. Most students scribbled something lazy, but I refused to write at all. When she came to my desk, she didn't scold or push. She just looked at me and said softly, "You don't have to write it today, but promise me you won't stop believing there's something worth writing about." That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the blank paper she gave me. For the first time in years, I wanted to say something to someone. I didn't know where to start, so I wrote, "Dear future me, I don't think you made it. But if you did, I hope you found a reason." I never turned that paper in. I folded it, put it in a box under my bed, and forgot about it. But her words stuck like quiet roots in the back of my mind. From then on, when she'd ask questions in class, I'd actually think before ignoring them. She noticed every little change, the way I sat straighter, the way my notebook wasn't empty anymore. She didn't say anything, but her smile said, "I see you." And in a world that had stopped seeing me, that was enough. Then came the day I almost gave up. My mom lost her job. The electricity was cut off. Dinner was a packet of crackers and water. I stopped going to school for 3 days. When I finally showed up, tired and bitter, Ms. Ward asked me to stay after class. I expected a lecture, maybe a detention slip. Instead, she handed me a small brown envelope. Inside was a note. "No one wins alone. Come back tomorrow. We'll figure this out together." There was a $50 bill folded inside. I tried to give it back, furious and embarrassed. But she stopped me. "It's not charity," she said. "It's belief. I'm just investing in yours." I never forgot that line. It wasn't the money that saved me. It was the feeling that someone finally cared whether I made it or not. I started showing up again, not because I had to, but because she made that classroom feel like hope had a seat waiting for me. The school year ended too soon. Ms. Ward announced she was moving away to care for her mother. On her last day, she gave everyone a small note folded into a paper star. Mine read, "You don't have to shine to be seen. Just keep the light." I never saw her again. I went back to drifting, jobs, bills, survival. Years passed like fog. I forgot how it felt to believe. But sometimes, when I'd pass a bookstore or see kids walking home from school, I'd hear her words echo again. Every story matters, even the ones still being written. I didn't realize it then, but she had planted something in me. A slow, patient kind of courage that only blooms when you need it most. 10 years later, I stood in front of a classroom of my own. A teacher. Me. The kid who once sat in the back with his hoodie up, pretending not to care. I had taken this job thinking it would just pay the bills, but on my first day, I found myself saying her exact words. Every story matters. And when I saw a quiet boy in the back, lost behind his own walls, I recognized that same look I once had. I didn't push him. I didn't lecture. I just smiled and said, "You don't have to write it today." That night, after my first class, I found the old box under my bed, the one I had carried through every move, every job, every heartbreak. Inside was the letter I wrote all those years ago. I unfolded it slowly. The words were faded, but still there. Dear future me, I don't think you made it. But if you did, I hope you found a reason. I smiled through tears and whispered, I did. A year later, I got a letter at school, no return address. Inside, in familiar handwriting, were just a few words. I heard what you became. I knew you would. Ms. Ward. I never knew how she found out, but that was the day I realized something profound. Sometimes, the people who save us never know they did. They plant something small and walk away, thinking it didn't take root. But years later, that seed grows into someone else's hope, because kindness never really ends. It just echoes from one life to another. For days after receiving that letter, I kept it in my pocket, folded carefully like something fragile and sacred. I'd touch it when classes got too loud, when the world felt too heavy, or when I doubted if I was doing enough. It reminded me that maybe Ms. Ward hadn't just taught me literature. Maybe she'd taught me how to be human again. Every time I spoke to a struggling student, I tried to hear her voice between my words, steady and calm, reminding me that kindness isn't about fixing someone. It's about showing them they're worth fixing. One evening, after class, I found a student waiting at my desk long after the bell had rung. Her eyes were red, her backpack half open, books spilling across the floor. She hesitated before whispering, "Sir, do you ever feel like no one sees you?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like looking through time and seeing my own reflection, the same loneliness, the same plea hidden behind those trembling words. I sat beside her and said quietly, "All the time. But that doesn't mean you're invisible. Sometimes, it just means the right eyes haven't found you yet." She didn't say anything after that. She just nodded, wiped her tears, and left. But I knew that tiny spark had been lit, the same one Ms. Ward had lit in me. Years rolled by like the slow turning of pages. Students came and went. Some left behind stories, others left behind silence. I became known as the teacher who always stayed late, who listened a little longer, who kept an extra box of notebooks in case someone forgot theirs. But the truth was, those weren't just notebooks. They were invitations. Each one carried a small note inside. You matter. Keep writing. One day, while clearing out old files, I found an envelope buried under stacks of essays. No name, no date. Just a short letter written in shaky handwriting. "Sir, you don't know me, but my sister was in your class. She said you made her believe life could still get better. She passed away last year, but I wanted you to know. She never stopped writing. Thank you." I sat there in silence, holding the paper as if it could still breathe. The world outside my window blurred, and I realized something Miss Ward had always known. The measure of a life isn't in how much noise you make, but in how many hearts your quiet touches. It was a stormy Thursday when fate decided to complete its circle. A district education conference was being held in the city, and I was invited to speak about the importance of empathy in classrooms. As I walked up to the stage, nervous and uncertain, I noticed a familiar face sitting in the front row. Silver hair, now streaked with white, glasses perched low on her nose. Ms. Ward. For a moment, time folded in on itself. I wasn't a teacher anymore. I was a boy in a hoodie, sitting in the back row, being seen for the first time. When I finished my talk, She stood, clapping softly, tears glinting behind her lenses. Afterward, she approached me, her voice trembling. "You've become everything I hoped you'd be," she whispered. I laughed through tears, replying, "Only because you believed I could." We sat in the corner of that busy hall, two teachers bound by one invisible thread, proof that compassion, once given, never fades. She told me she'd followed my journey through others, that my words had reached more hearts than she'd ever dreamed possible. And I told her that every life I touched was simply her kindness echoing forward. When Ms. Ward passed away 2 years later, the school where I worked held a small memorial. I was asked to say a few words, but I didn't prepare a speech. Instead, I brought out a single piece of paper, the first letter she ever gave me, the one that said, "You don't have to shine to be seen. Just keep the light." I looked at my students sitting before me, their eyes wide, some holding notebooks, some just listening in silence. I told them, "You may not realize it now, but every kind word, every patient act, every moment you choose to care, it lives longer than you do. Someone out there will carry it forward, just like I did." And then I placed that old paper star she had folded for me on the memorial table. The edges were frayed, the ink fading, but the message was eternal. That day, I understood her final lesson. A good teacher doesn't just teach lessons, they become them. Sometimes, late at night, I stay behind after all the students have gone. The classroom feels alive in the quiet. The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint scent of chalk dust, the echo of laughter long gone. I sit at her old desk, the one I asked to keep when the school replaced the furniture, and imagine her sitting there beside me, smiling. I often whisper, "Did I do it right?" And in the silence, I can almost hear her answer, "You did more than right. You continued the story." Because that's what life is, a chain of unseen kindness, a whisper passed from one heart to another. Some call it teaching. I call it love, written in lessons. And though she's gone, I know that somewhere, in the quiet corners of 1,000 classrooms, her light still glows. In every teacher who dares to believe, in every student who dares to hope. Years have passed since then, and yet, every morning when I unlock the classroom door, it still feels like I'm walking into something sacred. The sunlight filters through the blinds in golden ribbons, landing on rows of desks that have held countless dreams, some fragile, some fierce, all searching for meaning. I often wonder if my students realize how much they teach me. Each one is a new story, each silence a chapter still being written. Sometimes I see that same look I once had, the quiet storm behind their eyes, and I smile, because I know exactly what it means to be fighting invisible battles. I don't always have the right words, but I've learned that sometimes just being there is enough. That's the kind of magic Ms. Ward believed in. Not loud, not perfect, just steady, human presence. There's one shelf in my classroom that's different from the rest. A small wooden one filled with notebooks from students who decided to leave their stories behind after graduation. Some are filled with poems, others with confessions, dreams, or apologies they never said out loud. I keep them there as a promise, a living archive of souls who dared to speak. Every now and then, I'll pick one up and read a random page. Their words remind me that growth isn't always visible. Sometimes it's written in messy ink, in sentences that trail off mid-thought, in the bravery of showing up again after wanting to quit. And I think this is what teaching really is. Not about perfect essays or flawless grades, but about giving someone the courage to turn one more page. Ms. Ward taught me that every story matters, even the unfinished ones. Maybe especially those. Because life, after all, is just a collection of stories we're still learning how to tell. Last spring, during an open house, a young man approached me at the end of the day. His face looked familiar, though I couldn't place him. He handed me a small envelope and said softly, "You helped me once. I just wanted to say thank you." Inside was a faded piece of notebook paper with my own handwriting on it. It was one of those small notes I used to slip into forgotten notebooks. "You matter. Keep writing." He said he'd kept it in his wallet for years, through college, heartbreaks, even homelessness. And when things got dark, he'd unfold it, read it, and remember that someone once believed he was worth something. That night, I sat alone in the classroom, holding that note in my hands, realizing what Ms. Ward must have felt all those years ago. The quiet joy of knowing that the kindness you give doesn't vanish. It travels. It survives. It returns when the world needs it again. There's a saying Ms. Ward once wrote on the board that I never erased, even when the paint began to peel, even when the cleaners tried to wipe it away. It simply read, "We teach not to create followers, but to spark creators." Those words became my compass. They reminded me that the real measure of teaching and of living isn't in how much you give, but in how deeply it continues without you. And so, I teach not just lessons, but legacies. I don't want my students to remember me. I want them to remember how it felt to be believed in, the same way I remember Ms. Ward, because that feeling, that's immortality disguised as kindness. Now, as I grow older and my hair begins to silver, I often catch myself thinking about the moment when my story will also fade into someone else's. Maybe one of my students will sit at this very desk years from now, long after I'm gone, and whisper into the silence, "Did I do it right?" And maybe, just maybe, they'll hear my answer carried softly through the walls. "You did more than right. You continued the story." Because that's how light travels, not in straight lines, but in reflections. One teacher to another, one heart to the next. And so long as kindness continues to whisper in classrooms, libraries, and quiet corners of lonely hearts, Ms. Ward will never really be gone. Neither will I. There are moments now when I walk through the empty halls after school and see faint reflections in windows, echoes of old faces, laughter, and all the tiny memories that made these walls feel alive. The desks are scratched, the chairs uneven, but each mark feels like a fingerprint of a story that mattered. I sometimes stop by Ms. Ward's photograph in the teacher's gallery, a simple black and white picture tucked in the corner. Beneath it, the inscription reads, "She taught hearts how to listen." Every time I see it, I smile, because that's exactly what she did. She taught us how to listen not just to words, but to the quiet between them, to the pain people don't say out loud, to the hope they're too shy to name. And in doing so, she made us all a little more human. One afternoon, I received an email from a student I had taught years ago, someone who used to sit by the window, always sketching instead of taking notes. The message was simple. "I became an art teacher because of you. I wanted to give someone else what you gave me, a reason to stay." I read that line over and over until my vision blurred. It struck me that this was the real curriculum Ms. Ward had left behind. Not grammar, not literature, but the sacred art of believing in people. Each generation carries the lesson forward, passing it quietly like a candle in the dark, lighting the way for someone they may never meet. That's the true miracle of kindness. It outlives the moment, outgrows the giver, and finds its way to hearts still waiting for light. Now, when I lock the classroom for the last time each day, I take one last look at the chalkboard. There's a single sentence written in white chalk, faint but unerased. Every story matters, even the ones still being written. That was her line, the one that started it all. I keep it there for anyone who might walk in lost and need to see it, because somewhere out there, another student is waiting to be seen. Another teacher is wondering if they've done enough. And another whisper of kindness is about to begin its journey. I turn off the lights, step into the hallway, and smile to myself. The story isn't mine anymore. It never was. It belongs to every soul who dares to care, every heart that chooses to listen, and every teacher who changes a life without ever knowing.